I thought it was a pile of garbage, until it moved. That's what I told my dad when I got home that night. He didn't believe me at first. I wouldn't have believed me either. But I swear, it happened just like that. It was a Saturday, late October, and the leaves had started piling in crunchy mounds across the edges of Old Mill Road. That was the route I always took on my bike when I wanted to cut through the woods and head to Parker's Creek. I'd go there to skip stones, maybe fish if I remembered to bring worms, or just sit and think when things at home got too loud. Mom and Dad had been arguing again, and my sister Grace had locked herself in her room with her headphones turned up so loud you could hear her fake singing all the way from the kitchen. So I took off, just like I always did. My bike chain was squeaking and one of my brakes barely worked, but I knew that path by heart. The old Miller farm used to be near there, before it burned down last year. No one ever went that way anymore. That's probably why no one found the dog sooner. I didn't see it at first. I heard something, like dragging metal. It was the kind of sound that makes you stop because your brain can't figure out if it means danger or just something weird. So I stopped pedaling and let the wheels crunch to a halt. There was a thicket of bushes on the left side of the trail, half hidden behind the rusted-out shell of a pickup truck that must have been abandoned for decades. That's where the sound came from. I thought maybe it was a deer caught in something. Or worse, a bear trap. I've seen enough online videos to know how ugly those can get. I tiptoed closer, heart pounding like I was sneaking up on a ghost. And then I saw it. It was a dog. Or at least, I think it was a dog. His fur was so matted and full of brambles that it looked more like a sack of rags someone had thrown out. His legs were bent funny and wrapped in chains. Actual chains, like the kind you use to lock up a gate. Each leg had one, all attached to the same point, a metal ring bolted into the ground. I couldn't move at first. He just looked at me, those eyes dark and glassy but not mean, not scared either, just tired, like he'd been waiting so long for someone that he didn't believe I was real. "Hey, buddy," I whispered. "It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you." He didn't growl, didn't bark. He just blinked. I stepped forward, and that's when I saw it better. The chains were embedded in his fur, but not cutting through the skin. Someone had wrapped them tightly and then locked them, like they wanted him to stay there. For how long, I didn't know. There were old food cans nearby, rusted through, an empty bowl cracked down the middle, and a moldy old blanket that looked like it had once been blue. I don't know what made me do it, but I got on my knees and reached for him. "Let's get you out of here." The second I touched the chain, he flinched, but didn't bite. He just watched me. That broke something inside me. I talked to him the whole time, even though I don't think he understood any of it. I told him my name was Luke, that I was 13, that my bike was too small for both of us, but I'd figure it out. It took forever to get the chains loose. I didn't have anything sharp, just a pair of rusted garden clippers I found in the truck's bed. They weren't enough to cut through the metal, but I used them to pry open the padlocks. I don't know how I managed it, but one by one I got them off. Each time, he whimpered like he didn't know whether to be relieved or braced for pain. When the last shackle fell to the ground, he didn't run. He just collapsed beside me and laid his head on my lap. That's how we sat for at least 20 minutes. Me, scratching the dirt off his ears, and him, breathing like he was trying to remember how. Getting him home was the hard part. I couldn't ride with him, so I walked. It took almost 2 hours to push the bike with one hand and guide him with the other. Every few steps, he'd stop and rest. I didn't rush him. We didn't talk. We just walked. Like old friends who didn't need words. Dad was in the garage when we showed up. He dropped the wrench he was holding the second he saw the dog, Luke? What the heck? Where'd that thing come from? He was chained, I said. Out in the woods. Someone left him there. Dad stepped forward, then stopped. Is he dangerous? I shook my head. He's just tired. We took him to the vet the next morning. She was an older woman with kind eyes and silver hair that reminded me of smoke. She looked him over, checked his joints, took some blood, and scanned for a microchip. Nothing. No ID, no name, no records. He's lucky you found him, she said. Whoever did this wasn't planning on coming back. I named him Rusty, not because of the chains, but because his fur, once clean, turned out to be this deep reddish-brown like old barn wood. He had one ear that flopped sideways and a nose that always twitched like he was smelling stories in the air. The first week was rough. He didn't know what a bed was, didn't eat unless I hand-fed him, and flinched at every loud noise. But slowly, he got better. He started sleeping on my floor, then on the edge of my bed. He followed me everywhere, even into the bathroom once, which was awkward. School was school. I didn't tell anyone about Rusty at first, not even Parker or Nolan, my best friends since second grade. It felt too personal. Like if I said it out loud, it might stop being real. One night, I woke up to find Rusty sitting at the window. He was staring out at the trees like he was waiting for something, or someone. I sat beside him and put a hand on his back. You're safe now, I whispered. Whoever did that to you, they're not here. They don't get to win. He let out a long sigh and laid his head on my shoulder. I sat there for what felt like forever, petting him in the dark. But that's when things started to get weird. Strange noises at night, Rusty growling at shadows. And then, a week later, I found something out in the woods. Something that wasn't there before. A second set of chains, fresh, clean, waiting. And suddenly, I realized someone had meant for me to find him. I didn't tell anyone about the new chains, not at first. I told myself it could be coincidence, that maybe a hunter had left them behind, or someone used them to tie down a tent or something. But deep down, I knew better. These weren't the same chains as before, but they were the same kind, thick, heavy-duty, and looped around the base of a tree with a padlock snapped shut. They were too clean, too fresh, like they were waiting. Rusty wouldn't go near them. He stopped at the edge of the clearing and stared, tail stiff, ears pressed flat. I didn't try to drag him closer. Instead, I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures. It felt wrong, like I was photographing something I wasn't supposed to see. When I got home, I showed Dad the photos. He squinted at them, set his coffee down, and asked, "Where exactly is this?" "About a mile past the old truck," I said. "Same place I found Rusty." His face tightened. "You didn't touch anything, did you?" "No, just took the pictures." "All right, I'll head out there tomorrow. Don't go back alone, okay?" That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. That night, Rusty didn't sleep. He paced the room, moving from window to door, back and forth like he was guarding something. Every time a branch knocked against the house or the wind shifted, he'd freeze and stare like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. I tried to settle him down, brought him some leftover chicken, patted his head, even played soft music from my tablet, which usually helped. But nothing worked. He didn't bark, just moved, like he had a job to do and couldn't afford to relax. The next morning, Dad left early to check the woods. He told me to stay home, watch Grace, and keep my phone charged. Rusty stood by the front door for an hour after Dad left, staring after the truck like he expected something bad to happen. He didn't even touch his breakfast. When Dad came back, he was pale, There were more chains, he said. 4 sets. All of them clean. All of them locked into the ground. My heart thudded. Why? I don't know, he said. But I called the sheriff. They'll send someone to take a look. The sheriff came the next day. He was an older guy named Dewey, who smelled like tobacco and looked like he hadn't smiled in years. He and Dad walked into the woods together, but they came back sooner than I expected. Sheriff Dewey told us he'd look into it, but from the way he avoided eye contact, I could tell he didn't plan to do much. Probably thought we were overreacting. Or maybe he didn't want to believe it either. After that, I started keeping a notebook. I wrote down everything. Rusty's behavior, the noises at night, the spots he growled at. I started tracking patterns. I even marked places on a map where I thought something didn't feel right. I didn't really know what I was looking for, but it made me feel like I was doing something. Rusty started sleeping during the day and staying awake at night. He'd sit under my window or by the front door, listening, waiting. Sometimes he'd let out this low, throaty growl that made the hair on my arms stand up. One night, I couldn't sleep, so I got out of bed and sat with him. The moon was full, casting silver light across the backyard. We just sat there, side by side. I was thinking about the chains again, and the way Rusty had looked when I first found him. How broken he'd seemed, and how he was still trying to protect me, even though someone had once decided he wasn't worth saving. "Why would someone do that to you?" I asked. "What kind of person just leaves a dog to die like that?" Rusty didn't answer. Of course he didn't, but he looked at me. Not like an animal. More like a friend who wanted me to understand something but couldn't explain it. That weekend, Parker and Nolan came over. I hadn't planned on telling them about Rusty, but when they saw him, I couldn't lie. He wasn't just a dog anymore. He was part of the story. "You're saying someone chained him up out there?" Nolan asked, wide-eyed. "Yeah," I said. "And someone's still going back?" We rode out together the next day. I wasn't sure it was a good idea, but I also didn't want to be alone out there. Parker brought a crowbar. Nolan brought his dad's flashlight, even though it was noon. We followed the trail past the old truck and back to the clearing. The chains were gone. All of them. No broken links, no sign of a struggle. Just 4 patches of disturbed earth and the faint indentations where the rings had been. "Dude," Parker whispered. "What is this?" Nolan looked around, clutching the flashlight like a sword. "You think someone's watching us?" "I don't know," I said, "but we should go." Back at home, I showed them the photos I'd taken. The ones with the chains. Parker leaned in close. "Wait, what's that?" He pointed to the corner of one photo. I hadn't noticed it before. A smear of something dark, almost hidden by shadow. It looked like writing. Faded. But there, I zoomed in. It was a name. Or maybe a word. Flesher Parker looked at me. "What's that mean?" I didn't know, but I wrote it down in my notebook. That night, Rusty wouldn't stop growling. I'd never seen him like that. His eyes were locked on the hallway, his whole body tense. I checked the locks on every door, closed every window. My hands were shaking. Then I heard it. A thump. Soft. Like something landing on the porch. I peeked through the front window. No one there. But Rusty barked, a deep, furious bark that shook the floor. Dad came running from his room, baseball bat in hand. "What's going on?" "Something's outside," I said. We stepped onto the porch. The night was still. Too still. No crickets, no wind, just the faint smell of something foul. And on the porch steps, a piece of chain. Just one link. Rusted. Twisted. Dad stared at it, then picked it up with a towel. "That wasn't here yesterday." Rusty growled again, low and long. The next few days I didn't go to the woods. I didn't ride my bike. I stayed close to home. We checked the cameras Dad had installed after the porch incident, but they didn't catch anything. Just static around 2 in the morning, like the feed had glitched. Then Rusty disappeared. It was a Monday. I got home from school, opened the door, and he was gone. No note, no sign of struggle. His leash still hung on the hook, his food bowl untouched. Panic doesn't feel like a scream. It feels like a cold hole opening in your stomach and swallowing everything. I ran to the backyard. Nothing. I called his name until my throat hurt. Still nothing. Dad came home and joined the search. We drove around, checked with neighbors, called the animal shelter. No one had seen him. That night, I sat on the porch alone. The stars felt too far away. The world too big. I opened my notebook and flipped back to the word flesher. I typed it into a search engine. And that's when I found it. A news story. 10 years old. From a town 2 counties over. Local man found with dozens of dogs in makeshift kennels. Authorities say many were chained for months. The man's name? Gary Flesher. He'd been arrested, fined, and released. No jail time. He claimed the dogs were strays, and he was trying to help them. The court believed him, but people in the comments didn't. They said he moved a year later, disappeared. One comment chilled me more than the rest. If you find chains in the woods, get out. He's still out there. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. My mind kept looping back to Rusty, to the chains, to the way he'd acted. Like he knew something I didn't. The next day, I packed a bag. Flashlight, snacks, rope, a pocket knife, and my notebook. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not Dad, not Grace, not my friends. Because I knew where Rusty had gone. Back to the woods. Back to where it started. And I had to bring him home. The woods looked different that day. Not just because it was later in the fall, and the leaves were more brittle and golden. It felt different, like I wasn't supposed to be there. The wind moved wrong, whistling through the trees in a way I'd never noticed before. I tightened the straps on my backpack, pulled my hoodie over my ears, and stepped onto the trail. I didn't know exactly where I was going. I only knew I had to find Rusty. I retraced every path I'd taken with him since the day I found him. The old truck, the overgrown clearing, the site with the chains. It was all the same, but something had shifted. Even the birds were quiet. I walked for over an hour before I saw the first sign. A paw print. Not just one, either. A line of them, pressed into the damp dirt like little stamps leading off the trail. They were fresh, still sharp around the edges. And they were Rusty's. I knew it instantly. His front left pad always left a deeper imprint, probably from the way he used to carry weight when he was injured. I followed the tracks. They wove between trees, dipped into a shallow ravine, and climbed back out. At times, I had to crawl on my hands and knees to stay close to them. Every few steps I called his name, soft but firm. I didn't know if he'd answer. I just needed him to know I hadn't given up. Then I found the blanket. It was blue, or had been once. Moldy, frayed, and half covered in leaves, but I recognized it. It was the same one I saw in the clearing the first time I found him. Only now, it was moved. Not by weather or animals. It had been placed carefully over a small pile of leaves and brush, like someone was trying to hide something beneath it. I lifted the edge and found a cracked plastic bowl and a few chicken bones. Old. Picked clean. But still there. Someone had been feeding something out here, or luring it. I turned in a circle and looked around. No movement, no sounds. But I felt watched. "Rusty?" I said, louder now. "Boy, if you're out here, I need you to come out. I'm not mad. Just come back, okay?" Still nothing. I sat down on a log, pulled out a granola bar, and chewed slowly while scanning the trees. The light was fading. Sunset wasn't far off. If I didn't find him soon, I'd have to head back and try again tomorrow. I hated the idea of leaving him out here another night. Alone, afraid, or worse. Just as I stood up, I heard it. A bark. Not loud, not frantic, just one short bark from somewhere up ahead. "Rusty?" I ran, nearly tripped over a root. Branches whipped at my arms and legs, but I didn't care. I crashed through the underbrush, following the sound, shouting his name. I saw him before he saw me. He stood at the edge of a clearing, frozen, ears back, tail low. Not wagging, just still. His fur looked dusted with ash, like he'd rolled in something, and he was trembling. "Rusty!" I cried, stumbling toward him. He didn't run to me. He turned his head and looked behind him. That's when I saw it. A structure, half hidden by trees and overgrowth. Not a cabin, not a shed. Something in between. Made from old planks and sheet metal, the roof half collapsed, the windows covered in grime. It had no markings, no mailbox. Just a single door, hanging open by a single hinge. Rusty looked at me, then back at the building. He wanted me to see it. I stepped closer, heart pounding. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to get an adult, call the police. But my feet kept moving. I was past the point of turning back. Inside it was dark and smelled of mildew and something sharp, like rust and mold mixed together. The floor creaked beneath my sneakers. Rusty stayed behind me, one paw hovering like he wasn't sure if he was allowed in. The first thing I saw was the chains, hanging from hooks on the wall, coiled neatly on the floor, buckets full of padlocks, tools, old collars. Half buried in dust and dirt, there was a workbench on the side wall, and above it, a row of Polaroids. I stepped closer. My breath caught. Dogs. Dozens of them. Some looking up at the camera, others mid-snarl, some lying down. All different. All alone. Each photo had a date scribbled on it. No names. Just numbers. And in the center, Rusty. Younger. Cleaner. But it was him. The same lopsided ear. Same eyes. I turned to him. "Is this where he kept you?" He didn't move. I felt a pressure behind my eyes, like tears were trying to force their way out. But I blinked them back. I had to stay focused. I took out my phone and started taking pictures. Everything. The chains, the collars, the wall of photos. I wasn't sure if they'd be clear in the low light, but I had to try. Then I heard the footsteps. Soft. Slow. From outside. I crouched behind the workbench and pulled Rusty down with me. He stayed low, silent. A man stepped into the doorway, tall. Slender, wearing a stained jacket and a cap pulled low. His boots were muddy. His eyes, when he scanned the room, looked bored, like he'd done this before. He moved to the table, picked up a chain, and started coiling it like he was preparing for something. Rusty pressed against me, trembling. I held my breath. The man didn't see us. Not yet. He muttered something under his breath, then walked back out, humming. I waited a full 2 minutes before moving. My legs were shaking so badly I thought I might fall. I slipped out the back, through a gap in the wall, and into the brush. Rusty followed close. We didn't stop until we hit the old truck. Only then did I breathe again. He was still out there, still using those chains, still waiting for someone or something to come back. I told Dad everything, every detail. The shack, the photos, the man. He listened in silence, then called the sheriff. This time, they took us seriously. They went out the next morning. I wasn't allowed to go. They said it was for my own safety. But when they came back, Sheriff Dewey shook his head. "There's nothing there, son. Just an old shed. No chains. No photos. No sign of anyone living there." I couldn't believe it. "They were there. I saw them," Dad spoke up. "My son's not making this up. He had pictures." I pulled out my phone, opened the folder. Gone. Every photo. Every single one. Deleted. Sheriff Dewey patted my shoulder. "Sometimes the woods play tricks on you." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just nodded and walked back inside. That night, I sat on the floor with Rusty. His head was in my lap again, just like the first day. "We'll figure this out," I whispered. "I won't let him do this to anyone else." Rusty thumped his tail once. Then we both heard it. The porch creaked. Not loud. Just once. But we both looked toward the door and waited. The creak on the porch wasn't the wind. Rusty knew it before I did. He was on his feet in a flash, muscles tense, ears up. I stood slowly, my hand on his collar, both of us staring at the door. No knock. No voice. Just silence. And then another sound, lighter, like a footstep trying not to be heard. I grabbed the flashlight from my desk, not even sure why. Maybe to use as a weapon. Maybe just to feel like I had something. We moved quietly through the hall and stopped by the front window. I reached for the curtain, pulled it back just an inch. There was no one on the porch, but the gate was open. That gate never swung open on its own. It latched tight, even when the wind was strong. I swallowed hard and turned to Rusty. He looked up at me like he was waiting for the next move. I turned on the porch light. Nothing. Not even footprints in the frost-dusted steps. Rusty barked once, loud, sharp, and direct, then ran to the back door. That's when I realized it. He wasn't worried about the front. He was warning about the back. We bolted through the kitchen. I unlocked the back door and threw it open. The yard was empty. The old swing in the maple tree creaked in the wind, but nothing moved. Then I saw it. Another piece of chain. Smaller than before, left in the exact middle of the yard. Deliberate, Rusty growled, standing over it like it had no right to be there. I stepped around him and picked it up with a glove. Cold, smooth, recently handled. This wasn't over. That night, I barely slept. Every noise made my heart jump. I kept thinking about the man in the shack, how his boots were muddy, how he hummed like someone who felt safe. I stayed up researching his name again. Gary Flesher. No new information. It was like he vanished off the face of the earth after that incident years ago. The next morning, Dad let me stay home from school. He didn't ask questions, just told me to rest and said he'd be back from work early. Grace left for her friend's place, and for a few hours it was just me and Rusty. I sat on the floor with him, flipping through the notebook, trying to piece things together. The chains, the dates on the photos, the way Rusty always reacted before anything strange happened. It was like he could feel it coming. That's when I had an idea. I'd seen it in a documentary once, dogs used in search and rescue. They could find people just by scent. If Rusty remembered the man, maybe he could lead me to wherever he was hiding. I knew it was risky, but doing nothing felt worse. I packed a fresh bag. This time I added a first aid kit, a burner phone Dad had bought years ago for emergencies, and a walkie-talkie. I left the other one on the kitchen counter with a note. If I don't check in by sunset, call me. I didn't say where I was going, just that I was safe. Rusty followed me out the back gate, nose low to the ground. I didn't lead him, I just let him go. He sniffed the chain, circled twice, then took off toward the woods at a steady trot. We moved quickly. The forest felt darker today, even though it was still morning. The sun couldn't seem to break through the branches. I stayed close to Rusty, watching his body language, trusting him. We passed the truck, the ravine, the old clearing. He didn't stop. Then we veered east, off any trail I'd ever known. The brush got thicker. Vines snagged at our legs. Rusty hesitated once, looked back at me, then pushed forward. After maybe 40 minutes, we came to a small creek. On the other side, a clearing. It was new. I mean, I'd never seen it before, and something about it didn't fit. The grass was too even, the trees too far apart, like someone had made it that way. And in the center, half buried under leaves and branches, another shack. Smaller than the first one, more like a shed. Metal walls, a roof patched with tarp, no windows, just a single door shut tight. Rusty froze. I crouched beside him. You smell him, don't you? He didn't bark, just lowered his head. I circled wide, moving through the trees until I found a better angle. No signs of movement. But there were footprints around the entrance. Fresh. Big. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. The door groaned when I pushed. Inside, it was dark. Dust floated in the single beam of sunlight slicing through a hole in the roof. And the smell, wet fur, old food, metal. In the corner, a cage. Empty. Chains on the floor, a water bowl, scraps of raw meat swarming with flies. Someone had been here recently. Rusty sniffed the air, then growled low. He moved to the wall, pawed at a pile of blankets. I knelt beside him. Underneath was a book, a journal, leather-bound, old and stained. I opened it. The first page just said, Observations. Page after page listed dogs, breeds, ages, descriptions. Some crossed out, others underlined. Notes like, too aggressive, won't stop barking, obedient. Then came entries like, third day, no vocalization, responds to tone, good candidate, refused food for 48 hours, will isolate. Subject 19 retrieved from Creek Trail, shows signs of remembering, unfavorable. The last entry. Subject 34 returned to site, proceeding with containment. That had to be Rusty. A sound outside made me slam the book shut. Footsteps. Getting closer. I stuffed the journal into my bag and grabbed Rusty by the collar. We slipped out the back. No door there, just a tarp. Rusty bolted into the trees and I followed. Behind us, a voice. Come on out now. Don't make me drag you back. We didn't stop running. Branches clawed at us. I tripped once, scraped my knee, but kept going. I didn't look back. Couldn't. We ran until we couldn't hear anything but our own breath. When we finally stopped, I leaned against a tree, panting. Rusty stood beside me, tail still, chest rising and falling fast. I pulled out the journal and flipped through it again. The writing was shaky in places, like someone had written it in the dark or while cold. The further I read, the more I realized this wasn't about training or rescue. It was about control. Whoever this was, they weren't trying to help dogs. They were collecting them, studying them, and then letting them go? No, not letting. Testing. I closed the book. We had to get back. Show Dad. Go to the sheriff, again. This time with proof they couldn't ignore. We made it home by late afternoon. I used the walkie to tell Dad I was back, just like I promised. Then I spread everything on the kitchen table. Dad read every page of that journal. His hands shook. He didn't speak until the end. "This is enough," he said. "They can't ignore this." He called the sheriff. When Dewey showed up, he didn't say much. Just took the journal, asked a few questions, and promised to follow up. But I saw his face when he flipped through the pages. He believed us now. That night, Dad locked every door, set up motion sensors. He didn't say it, but I knew he was scared too. Rusty curled up by my bed, eyes open, always watching. I sat there, notebook in my lap, pen in hand, wondering what would come next. Because this wasn't over. It was just getting started. The next morning started too quiet. Even Rusty, usually on alert before sunrise, stayed curled up at the foot of my bed like he knew moving would only stir up more of the wrong kind of attention. I sat up slowly, rubbed my eyes, and looked out the window. A fog had rolled in overnight, thick and low to the ground, swallowing the edges of the yard. Dad was already in the kitchen when I got downstairs. He had the journal open again, flipping through pages like he was looking for something he missed. He hadn't said much after Sheriff Dewey left the night before, and I knew better than to push him. Still, something felt different in the way he was hunched over that book. Less like a man trying to make sense of something and more like someone searching for a pattern. Rusty trotted in, gave Dad a sniff, then sat by my feet with a soft huff. I leaned down to scratch behind his ears, my hand brushing over the spot where the fur never fully grew back. "There's a page torn out," Dad said without looking up. I blinked. "What?" He tapped the seam between two entries. "Right here. Page 47. There's a clean tear, and then it jumps a week ahead." I stepped closer. He was right. One page was clearly missing, and the entry after it started with, "Control failed. Subject removed." Removed. Not escaped. Not released. Removed. I didn't like the sound of that. Neither did Rusty. He growled softly, head still low. "Do you think someone took it out?" I asked. Dad nodded slowly. "Or he did. Maybe that page said too much." We stared at the book in silence. Then Dad reached into a drawer, pulled out a small black box, and placed it on the table. It was a trail camera. One of the ones we used for deer spotting a few years ago. "We're setting this up today," he said, "back where you found that second shack." We packed everything we'd need. Gloves, the camera, extra batteries, some high-protein jerky just in case. I brought the burner phone again. Dad had already called off work. Grace was at school. This time, it was just the two of us and Rusty. The hike out felt longer, even though we took the same route I had before. Maybe it was the weight of knowing what we were walking toward. When we reached the creek, Dad pointed out a better spot to cross. A fallen log, half covered in moss. We passed through the trees in near silence until the clearing came into view. But the shed was gone. No tarp, no metal walls, no footprints, just grass, flattened in a rectangle where something used to be. Rusty barked once and charged forward, sniffing every inch of the ground. His nose whipped back and forth faster than I'd ever seen. He darted to the edge of the clearing and stopped at a tree. There, hanging from a low branch, was another collar. Old. Faded. But not his. Dad took it down carefully. It was small. too small for Rusty. Inside, someone had burned letters into the leather with what looked like a soldering iron. Bindi. That's not in the journal, Dad said. He was right. I flipped through again. No mention of a bindi. No subject 35 either. We set up the trail cam anyway, right on the edge of the clearing, facing the flattened patch. Dad anchored it into the trunk and checked the angle twice. We didn't speak much on the walk home. I kept looking behind us, but nothing followed. Back at the house, we uploaded a few more photos to Dad's laptop. Pictures of the site, the collar, and the journal pages we hadn't already backed up. Dad said we'd wait a day or two and then check the trail cam, but we didn't get a day. That night, just after 11, the motion alert from the backyard camera went off. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and opened the app on my phone. The live feed blinked once, then loaded. There was something in the yard. Not a person, not an animal, just something. A dark shape, hunched low. It moved slow, like it was dragging itself forward. I dropped the phone and ran for the back door. Dad was already there, baseball bat in hand, the same one he'd had since the first chain appeared. We threw the door open. The yard was empty, but something had been there. The grass was pressed down in two lines, like knees or paws had dug into the dirt. Rusty stood on the porch, nose to the air, growling so deep it sounded like it came from his ribs. We didn't sleep. We just sat there, Dad and me, side by side, Rusty between us, watching, listening, waiting. At sunrise, Dad checked the backyard footage again. This time he paused the video and enhanced the contrast. The shape wasn't a dog. It was a man, on his hands and knees, crawling. That afternoon, we hiked back out and retrieved the trail cam. The card had 3 captures, all from just before midnight. The first showed the clearing, empty. The second showed a shape. The same crouched figure from our yard, crawling into the grass. The third was blank. Just static. We stared at the monitor. The timestamp confirmed it. He'd gone from our backyard to the clearing in under an hour. "How's he even finding us?" I whispered. Dad leaned back, eyes narrowed. "Maybe it's not just him." We didn't talk about what that meant, not out loud, but I kept thinking about those entries. The words "subject retrieved" and "shows signs of remembering." What if the dogs weren't the only ones being tested? 2 nights later, we heard the sound again. Not footsteps. Not a creak. But barking, far off, dozens of voices. All at once, Rusty shot upright and ran to the window. He paced, whined, then barked back, loud, fierce. I followed him outside. The sound was coming from the woods, deep in the trees. Too many to count. Some sounded close, others far. But they weren't fighting. They weren't howling. They were calling. Rusty stood at the edge of the yard and stared into the trees. Then he looked at me. I knew what he wanted. We had to go back. Whatever was happening out there, it wasn't over. It hadn't even started. We packed again. This time, Dad brought his old trail rifle. Not loaded. Just enough to scare someone if it came to that. I brought both walkies, a second camera, and a notepad to write down everything. We followed the sound. Not to the shack this time, not to the clearing, but deeper. Into the heart of the woods. The trees grew closer together. The ground turned soft, swampy in places. It felt older, untouched. Rusty kept his nose low, tail up, moving like he was being pulled. And then we found it. Not a structure. Not a cage. but a pit. 6 feet wide, maybe 4 feet deep, lined with metal sheets. And in the bottom, bones, dozens, some clearly animal, others too broken to tell. Dad didn't speak. He just raised the camera and took picture after picture. Rusty growled again, but this time it wasn't at the pit, it was at the woods. Behind us, something moved. We spun around. Nothing. Then we saw the eyes, dozens of them, watching. Not glowing, just still, silent. Rusty stepped in front of us and stood his ground. That's when we heard the voice. Not loud, not angry, just calm. Some of them remember. That's the problem. We didn't wait. We ran. We sprinted through the dense underbrush, branches snapping at our faces, the ground slippery beneath our feet. Rusty led, agile and sure-footed, darting left and right to guide us through openings in the brush. Behind us, the low, calm voice continued, steady but fading as we put distance between it and ourselves. When we finally stopped to catch our breath, I leaned against a tree, gulping in air. Dad stood beside me, scanning the woods nervously, his rifle still gripped tightly. Rusty sat alert, ears twitching, eyes focused on something invisible in the distance. The forest around us had grown silent again, but it felt unnatural now, as if the trees themselves were listening, waiting. "What was that?" I gasped, clutching at my chest. Dad shook his head slowly, his face pale beneath the afternoon light filtering through the leaves. "I don't know, Luke, but it's something far worse than we thought." Rusty whined softly, nudging my hand, his eyes wide and concerned. We took a moment to regroup, and Dad checked the compass on his watch. "We need to head north. It'll loop us around to the creek, and we can follow that home." We moved cautiously, each step deliberate, quieter now. Rusty stayed close, no longer venturing far ahead, but always turning to check on us. After nearly an hour of careful progress, we reached the familiar banks of the creek. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. On the opposite bank stood Sheriff Dewey. He was waiting quietly, leaning against a tree, arms folded casually across his chest. His expression was unreadable, eyes shadowed beneath his hat. "Sheriff," Dad called out cautiously. "Didn't expect to see you out here." Dewey tilted his hat back slightly. "I've been following some leads. Thought you might be too." Rusty growled low, stepping defensively in front of us. "Easy there," Dewey said, voice calm and reassuring, though he didn't move any closer. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "Then why are you here?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. He took a deep breath, gaze shifting between Dad and me. "Because this has been going on far longer than anyone wants to admit. I've been keeping an eye on the woods since your first call. Seen things I can't explain." "So you believe us now?" Dad asked sharply. Dewey nodded slowly. "I always believed you. But sometimes it's safer to pretend you don't. Keeps folks from panicking." I frowned, stepping forward cautiously. "What do you know about Gary Flesher?" Sheriff Dewey's eyes narrowed slightly. "More than I'd like. Flesher disappeared years ago, right after that incident with the dogs. But the locals knew he hadn't gone far. Things like that don't just stop happening." "So why hasn't anyone done anything?" Dad pressed, frustration edging into his voice. Dewey sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Because he's smart. Careful. No evidence ever stuck. And when people started asking questions, strange things happened. Pets disappeared. Folks got scared." "What does he want with the dogs?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dewey hesitated, looking at Rusty briefly before answering. Control. It's about control. And loyalty. He's obsessed with proving he can change them. Break them. Rusty growled again, fur bristling along his spine. He can't, I said firmly, kneeling beside Rusty and stroking his side gently. Rusty isn't broken. None of them are. Sheriff Dewey nodded thoughtfully, eyes softer now. I know that, son. That's why I haven't given up. And neither should you. We walked back together, quieter, but more determined. The sheriff explained he'd been tracking sightings and patterns. Dogs reported missing, strange markings in the woods, small communities spooked into silence. We weren't alone, he told us. Others had encountered similar things, but fear kept them quiet. Back home, Sheriff Dewey promised he'd call in additional help, though he warned it might not come quickly. We were to keep doors locked and stay vigilant. Dad secured the house further, installing stronger locks and motion detectors around every entry point. Even Rusty seemed aware of the heightened tension, patrolling the house tirelessly, alert to every creak or shadow. Days passed slowly, each night filled with restless sleep and half-heard noises. School seemed pointless, conversations hollow. My friends noticed, but I couldn't explain it. Not yet. Then, one afternoon, Parker and Nolan showed up at my door. They hadn't called ahead, which was unusual, but their expressions made it clear they had a reason. We found something, Parker began immediately, eyes wide and serious. What kind of something? I asked, stepping outside to join them on the porch, Rusty close at my heels. Nolan glanced nervously toward the trees, lowering his voice. Chains. Like the ones you showed us in your pictures. They're back. My heart skipped a beat. Where? Near the old Miller farm, Parker replied. We didn't touch them. Just came straight here. Dad was at work. Sheriff Dewey was unreachable. We were on our own. I grabbed my bag, the burner phone, and a camera, and the four of us, including Rusty, headed toward the old farm. The air felt charged, the woods whispering secrets we were never meant to hear. We arrived at the spot quickly. Chains, fresh and new, locked in place, awaiting something. Rusty sniffed them cautiously, hackles raised. As I took pictures, Nolan pointed at something in the dirt. Footprints. Human. Large, clear. We followed them carefully, Rusty leading, ears perked. The tracks led deeper into the woods, eventually reaching an area none of us had seen before. Trees had been marked, carved with symbols that looked like twisted, meaningless letters. Rusty stopped suddenly, staring at something ahead. A low, weathered cabin, hidden by dense growth, sat silent and still. The door was cracked open slightly. We crept closer, breathing shallow. Rusty refused to enter, growling softly at the threshold. I nudged the door open further, heart racing. Inside, darkness, a smell of rot and earth. Chains hung from the walls, empty cages lining one side, rusted and battered. A small table held a single, open book. Stepping forward, I saw it was a newer journal, pages filled with neat handwriting. The last entry read clearly. Subject 35. Rusty. Observed forming attachment. Retrieval imminent. Must reassess methods. A chill ran through me. Rusty barked loudly, startling us all. Footsteps approached from outside, slow and deliberate. The door creaked open wider. A figure stepped inside, silhouetted by sunlight. Gary Flesher smiled calmly, his voice gentle yet sinister. I've been waiting for you. Gary Flesher stepped into the dim cabin, his movements calm and deliberate. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet felt glued to the dusty floorboards. Rusty stood rigid, fur raised, eyes locked onto Flesher. Parker and Nolan backed slowly toward the door, their breathing loud and uneven. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs. "You've caused quite a stir," Flesher said, smiling as though we were friends gathered around a campfire. His voice was smooth, unsettlingly gentle. "But that's all right. Curiosity is important. It shows intelligence." "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. I tried to keep my eyes on him, but I couldn't stop glancing at the chains hanging ominously from the walls. Flesher regarded me thoughtfully, taking another careful step forward. Rusty emitted a deep, rumbling growl, stepping protectively between us. "Ah, Subject 35, Flesher said warmly. "You're looking much healthier now, happier even. I knew you'd come back. Loyalty, after all, is something I've always admired in dogs, and in people." I clenched my fists, anger flaring alongside my fear. "Rusty's not yours. He's not a subject. He's my friend." "Is he?" Flesher's eyes narrowed slightly, though his smile didn't fade. "Friendship can be broken, Luke, but loyalty, true, tested loyalty, that's unbreakable. Rusty here is proof of that." Behind me, Nolan whispered urgently, "Luke, we need to go." But Flesher shook his head slightly, lifting a finger in caution. "Leaving now would be unwise. There are things you still need to understand. You're part of something bigger." "What are you talking about?" I snapped, frustration mixing with fear. "This isn't some experiment. This is cruelty. You're hurting these animals." Flesher sighed, almost sounding disappointed. "I'm shaping them, giving them purpose, strength through adversity. They understand it eventually, even if people rarely do. Rusty understood. He's stronger now because of me." "You're wrong," I said fiercely, feeling Rusty's warmth against my leg. "Rusty's stronger because he survived you, not because of you." Flesher's gaze hardened briefly, a crack in his composed exterior. "Interesting theory, but flawed. Strength is born from trial. You'll learn this soon enough." Suddenly, the cabin filled with barking, harsh, frantic, echoing from outside. Rusty barked once in response, ears swiveling rapidly. Flesher's calm demeanor vanished as quickly as it appeared. His eyes darted nervously toward the door, uncertainty flashing briefly across his face. Taking advantage of his distraction, Parker lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "Let's go!" We burst from the cabin into the fading daylight, Rusty at our heels. Behind us, Flesher shouted, a voice now edged with desperation, but we didn't stop. We sprinted, branches whipping against our arms, feet pounding through mud and leaves, driven by pure adrenaline. The barking behind us grew louder, closer. Dozens of dogs seemed to surround us, invisible through the dense underbrush, their calls guiding us forward. Rusty led, every stride purposeful, weaving through trees until we finally broke free of the woods and stumbled onto the familiar dirt path. We didn't slow down until we reached my backyard, collapsing in breathless heaps onto the grass. Rusty stood guard, scanning the shadows, alert and tense. Dad emerged from the house, rushing toward us, face filled with worry. "Where have you been? What happened?" Parker spoke first, still gasping. "We found him. Gary Flesher. He's still out there." Dad paled visibly, glancing toward the forest as though expecting Flesher to emerge at any moment. "Inside," he said firmly. "Now." Once safely behind locked doors, we recounted everything, our voices shaking, Rusty never leaving my side. Dad called Sheriff Dewey, but the call went straight to voicemail, leaving us alone to face the creeping darkness outside. "Why didn't Dewey pick up?" Nolan whispered anxiously. Dad shook his head slowly, glancing uneasily toward the windows. I don't know, but we're not waiting around to find out. That night was the longest yet. Every sound, every shift of shadows sent my heart racing. Rusty prowled the house restlessly, clearly sensing something we couldn't. Sleep felt impossible, every moment stretched thin with tension. Just before dawn, the silence was shattered by frantic barking outside, the same chaotic chorus we'd heard earlier. Rusty bolted upright, paws pressed urgently against the window, whining insistently. "Dad!" I called urgently, but he was already moving, rifle in hand, eyes wide. Outside, shapes moved swiftly through the dim morning mist. Dogs, dozens of them, circling the edge of our yard, eyes gleaming with intelligence. They weren't threatening, though. Their movement seemed coordinated, protective. Rusty pressed his nose against the glass, tail wagging hesitantly. And standing at the edge of the tree line was a solitary figure. Gary Flesher watched silently, motionless, barely visible in the dimness. Our eyes locked through the window, and he nodded once. Slow, deliberate. Then he turned and vanished back into the forest. Rusty whined softly, leaning against me, his whole body trembling. Dad lowered his rifle slowly, breathing heavily, visibly shaken. "This isn't over," I whispered, the truth settling heavy in my chest. "No," Dad agreed quietly, voice strained with exhaustion. "But we're not alone in this anymore." Outside, the dogs began dispersing, slipping quietly back into the shadows, their presence a silent promise. We weren't the only ones fighting back anymore. Rusty nudged my hand gently, eyes warm and reassuring, and I knelt beside him, heart still racing, but suddenly stronger, determined. Whatever Flesher had planned, we would face it together, ready for whatever was coming next. The morning after Gary Flesher vanished back into the woods, our house felt different. Not safer, just charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. I kept looking out the windows, half expecting those dogs to reappear, lining the tree line with those steady, knowing eyes. Rusty hadn't stopped pacing. Every time I thought he'd finally laid down to rest, he was up again, ears twitching, nose sniffing the air like he sensed something shifting. And maybe he did. Dad made calls all morning, first to Sheriff Dewey, still no answer, then to state police. This time he didn't ask for advice. He demanded help. When they said they'd send someone out in a few days, he hung up, jaw clenched, and started taking inventory of every tool, camera, and scrap of tech we had in the house. I helped, but my mind kept drifting. To Flesher. To that moment in the cabin when he looked right at me and smiled like he knew me. I couldn't shake that look, or the way he said I was part of something bigger. After lunch, I retreated to my room with Rusty. He finally settled beside my bed, eyes still open, but his breathing slower. I sat with my notebook, flipping through everything we'd documented. Maps, photos, the torn journal pages, timelines. I started drawing a new diagram, linking sightings of the chains to where the dogs had been found. The pattern wasn't perfect, but it was there. Rusty's tail thumped once against the floor. "You see it too?" I asked softly. He didn't move, but I knew he was listening. I tapped the page. He's setting up something, a boundary, a ring. But why? My phone buzzed suddenly, a text from Nolan. "You up?" I replied yes, and seconds later my phone rang. "Luke," Nolan's voice was tense. "Something's wrong at Parker's house. I tried calling him. No answer. His mom's car is still there. And I swear I saw something in their backyard. A dog, I think. But it wasn't Rusty. I stood immediately, adrenaline spiking. "I'm coming." Dad didn't argue. He just grabbed his keys, his rifle, and told me to bring Rusty. We drove fast, the kind of fast that gets you pulled over, but we didn't care. Nolan was waiting at the end of Parker's driveway, eyes wide. "I knocked. No one answered," he said. "But I saw shadows inside. Something moved upstairs." We approached cautiously. Rusty tensed, growled low, and pulled toward the back gate. I followed, heart in my throat. There were paw prints in the mud. Dozens of them. All leading toward the side door. One of the windows was cracked open. Screen torn. Dad motioned for me to stay back. He slipped through the gate first, eyes scanning every corner. Then he nodded for us to follow. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The kitchen was untouched, a plate of toast on the table, still half-eaten. Parker's shoes were by the stairs, just like always. Rusty moved slowly, nose to the floor. Then he stopped at the base of the staircase and looked up. That's when we heard it. A voice. Muffled. Weak. "Help!" Dad moved fast, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Nolan and I followed, Rusty right behind. The voice came again, clearer this time. Parker. We found him in the upstairs bathroom, locked inside. He was curled in the bathtub, bruised, shirt torn, eyes wide with fear. When he saw us, he choked on a sob and reached out. Dad forced the door open. Parker fell into our arms, shaking. "He was here!" he gasped. "Flesher. He came through the window. He had something, like a whistle. The dogs came with him. I tried to hide. He said I'd been too curious." Dad knelt beside him, checking for injuries. "Did he take anything?" Parker shook his head. "No. He just watched." And then he said, "Tell Luke I don't blame him. Curiosity runs in the blood." I froze. "What did you say?" Parker looked up at me. "That's what he said. Word for word." I backed away slowly, my mind spinning. How did he know my family? What did he mean by "in the blood"? Back at home, I asked Dad if he'd ever heard the name Flesher before this. He hesitated. "Luke, your grandfather. My dad. He was a park ranger for almost 30 years. Spent more time in the woods than at home. After he retired, he stopped talking about the job. Said some things were better left buried." "And?" I pressed. He rubbed his jaw, uneasy. "He mentioned the name once, Gary Flesher. Said he was trouble. But that was years ago. I didn't think much of it." "What if he knew more?" I asked. "What if Flesher's been doing this longer than anyone realized?" Dad nodded slowly. "It's possible. Your grandfather kept journals? I'll check the attic." It took hours, but we found them. Old notebooks, weathered with age, stacked in a trunk beneath moth-eaten quilts. We brought them down and opened the first one. Page after page, detailed patrols, trail maintenance, wildlife logs. Then one entry jumped out. July 14th, 1982. Found chains in Sector 9. Looked recent. Reported to HQ. Was told to ignore. Heard barking that night. Not wild. Controlled. Human? And another. August 3rd, 1982. Followed trail of prints. Found makeshift kennel. Empty, but signs of recent occupation. Felt watched. Took nothing. Left quickly. And finally, October 1st, 1982. Saw him, Flesher. Younger, but unmistakable. He smiled. Said I'd understand eventually. Said we were alike. I haven't gone back since. Dad read the entries twice, jaw tight. He's been at this since before you were born. I leaned back, overwhelmed. Rusty placed his head in my lap, warm and steady. The next day, I brought the journals to Nolan's and showed Parker. We made a copy of every page and mapped out every location mentioned. Patterns emerged. Circles, rings, areas that had gone quiet, then lit up again years later. Rusty hovered over the map, nose twitching. He barked once and pawed at a spot, an old ranger station, abandoned decades ago. "We have to go there," I said. Dad didn't argue. He packed supplies, loaded the car, and told us to gear up. Parker wanted to come, but we made him stay. He needed rest. Nolan stayed too. It was just me, Dad, and Rusty. The drive was long, the roads narrowing the deeper we got. Eventually we parked and hiked the rest of the way. The woods were thick, untouched. The ranger station appeared like a ghost, wood faded to gray, windows dark. Inside, dust blanketed every surface. But there were signs of life, recent ones. A lantern, a cot, a ledger. I opened the ledger carefully. Names, dates. Most entries were blank. Some had check marks. Others had notes. Subject 12 relocated. Subject 19 rejected training. And 1, Subject 35, pending reconditioning. Watch closely. Attachment compromised. Rusty barked loudly. A door slammed upstairs. We drew our flashlights and climbed slowly. The hallway stretched long, lined with empty rooms. At the end, a door stood ajar. Inside was a desk, a chair, and a radio. The radio crackled. Then a voice. "You're getting close, Luke, but you still don't see it all. Come find me, I'm ready." Dad stepped forward and shut the radio off. We stood in silence, the truth heavier than ever. Flesher wasn't just playing a game. He was waiting, preparing, and he wanted me there for the end. I looked at Rusty. He didn't flinch, didn't growl, just stared ahead, ready. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. This wasn't the end. Not yet. But it was coming. The forest was thicker here than anywhere else we'd been. The ranger station behind us looked more like a memory now than a place, swallowed by the trees and time. Dad checked the compass again, but we didn't need it. Rusty was already moving, steady and sure, nose to the ground. He led us away from the old logging trails and deeper into wilderness that no map really covered. We didn't talk much. We were past the point of guessing. The journals, the ledgers, the cabin, the voice on the radio, they all pointed in one direction. Gary Flesher wasn't hiding anymore. He wanted us to find him. And the worst part was, I wanted to find him too. I needed to understand why. Why us? Why Rusty? Why so many dogs for so many years? Rusty suddenly stopped at a clearing rimmed with pine. His body stiffened. Ears pricked. Then, slowly, he turned and looked at me. A soft whine escaped his throat. Dad caught up beside me, panting lightly. "We close?" I nodded. "He's here." We stepped into the clearing. It was oddly symmetrical, with stones arranged in a wide circle and thick poles rising from the ground, some broken, some freshly placed. Old chains were coiled neatly at the base of one. Bones, animal bones from the look of them, were arranged in piles, some recently picked clean. And then I saw him. Gary Flesher stood on the far side of the circle, his coat as tattered as before, but his eyes sharp, Not wild, not even angry. Just focused. Like this was the moment he'd waited for longer than he could explain. "You found it," he said, almost like a greeting. Dad raised the rifle, hands where I can see them. Flesher didn't move. "I don't need to fight you. That's not what this is about." "You hurt my son's friend," Dad said, voice tight. "You terrorized our town. You chained dogs in the woods like they were garbage." "I tested them," Flesher said, calm. "You can't teach loyalty, but you can reveal it. You break something, you see what it was really made of. That's where truth hides." Rusty snarled, stepping forward. Flesher looked down at him, tilting his head. "I remember you," he said gently. "You were my best subject. Quiet. Resilient. You didn't turn vicious like the others. You held on. That's why I let you go." I stepped between them, not sure what I was doing until I was already there. "No, you didn't. I found him. I freed him. You didn't let him go. You failed." Flesher's jaw tightened. "You think you're saving something, Luke? You think taking them out of the wild and bringing them into your homes changes what they are?" "They're not yours to change," I said. "And you don't get to twist what you did into some kind of philosophy." He looked past me at Dad. "I warned your father. I gave him the chance to understand. He didn't. Now you're here. Maybe you'll learn what he wouldn't." Rusty barked sharply. From the trees behind us, other dogs began to emerge. 1, 2, 4, 8. Every direction. They didn't growl, didn't snarl. They stood in a loose ring, surrounding the clearing, watching. "See?" Flesher whispered. "They come back. They always do. Because they're drawn to the source." "No," I said, my voice shaking now. "They're not drawn to you. They're drawn to each other. To Rusty. To safety." He flinched at that, almost imperceptibly. "You tried to control them," I continued. "You hurt them, scared them. But they still found each other. They still protected us. They came together when they could have run. That's loyalty. That's what you'll never understand." Rusty stepped forward again. No growl, no bark, just one long look into Flesher's eyes. Flesher's hand twitched, and for one awful moment I thought he might grab something. But then he dropped to his knees. "I thought I could teach it," he said, voice raw. "I really did. I thought if I broke enough of them, one would show me how to fix it." Dad lowered the rifle. "You don't get to say you were trying to fix anything. You made them suffer." Flesher looked up at me. "You want to know why you? Why this dog?" "Because I saw something in him I never saw in any of the others. He didn't hate me, even when I chained him. He waited. He trusted. I don't know why, but I thought maybe if someone like you found him, you'd see it too." I shook my head. "You don't get to rewrite your cruelty as a test. This wasn't about loyalty. It was about power. You wanted to be needed." The dogs behind us began to move closer, but not toward us. Toward Flesher. He didn't move. Just stared ahead, mouth parted, like he was seeing them for the first time. One by one, the dogs approached. They didn't bark, didn't lunge. They stood around him, watching, silent. Then Rusty stepped up to him, just inches away. He looked Flesher dead in the eye. And then he turned away. Walked back to me. That was it. The moment. The rejection. Flesher sat there in the circle of dogs, shoulders slumped, staring at the empty space where Rusty had been. There was nothing left to say. Dad stepped forward, hand on my back. "We're taking you in. You're done." Flesher didn't resist, didn't argue, just stood, slow and tired. The walk back felt longer than the one in. The The dogs followed for a while, but eventually drifted into the trees, one by one. All except Rusty. We called the authorities when we reached the edge of the ranger station. This time they came. State police, animal rescue teams, even local reporters. They took our evidence, our journals, our photos. They arrested Flesher. Quietly, without a fight. The story spread fast. Wilderness dog abuser found after decades of hiding. That's what the headline said. But it wasn't the real story. The real story was in the way Rusty slept soundly for the first time since I found him. The way he stopped pacing. The way he finally lay in the sun and closed his eyes like he knew he didn't have to protect us anymore. We kept him, of course. He never left my side, not once. People started reaching out to us, strangers with stories of their own. Lost dogs, mysterious sightings, noises in the woods. Some wanted answers. Others just wanted to thank us for not looking away. Parker recovered. Nolan stayed by his side through all of it. Dad wrote a letter to the state about what had been ignored for too long. And I wrote everything down. All of it. Rusty would sometimes stare out the window, especially when the wind picked up, like he was remembering something. But he always turned back to me with that calm, steady look. As if to say, "It's okay, I came back." And he had. So had all of us. From the chains, from the fear, from the silence. We were free.